And when Hungary began to roll up the Iron Curtain, tens of thousands of East Germans saw it on West German television. The word spread in no time.
Wunderbar, super, ganz super.
First, they headed for those openings in the fence between Hungary and Austria.
Let's go!
And then they headed for the West German embassy in Kiev. The pressure of East Germans fleeing in such numbers forced the East German government to make one concession after another. The country was hemorrhaging. The pressure was too much. The communist leadership buckled. Travel restrictions, it said, would be lifted. It was a momentous declaration. And that very night, for the first time since 1961, they made a hole in the Berlin Wall. It had not seemed possible only months ago. Now anything seemed possible.
That footage, of course, 20 years ago this weekend, the fall of the Berlin Wall, the fall of communism in Eastern Europe. And I think that's something that a lot of Americans, particularly those who've grown up in the post-Cold War era, take for granted, and something that makes it very ironic that the U.S. House of Representatives decided to pick this weekend to symbolically pass the universal health care, the Obamacare bill, through Congress. It's very interesting that we've decided as Congress to ignore the will of the people, to ignore what makes good common sense, to ignore fiscal reality, to give an entitlement to the people of this country for the greater good. Because after all, in the eyes of official Washington, it's the state, not the individual, not you, the healthcare consumer, you, the taxpayer, who knows best. And I think it's very telling that they picked this weekend to pass this healthcare resolution as we celebrate the 20th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall. You see, for so long, for 28 long years, the people of East Germany, particularly the people symbolically of East Berlin, suffered behind the oppression, from suffering behind the wall, from being unable to visit relatives in West Germany, from being unable to escape the wrath of a totalitarian society. And sadly, we as Americans are seemingly being coerced or urged to give up our freedoms to what we have fought so long and hard to keep. We basically are being asked to give these away by members of Congress who think that you are not qualified enough to make a health care decision for yourself, that the state is the one who is required to make sure that all of our health care needs are met. We're piecemeal giving away the freedoms that we as Americans have fought so long for, that so many people in Eastern Europe, in Soviet Russia, in East Germany, in Czechoslovakia, in Hungary, in Poland, so many people died to get those freedoms. We here in America seem that we are just piecemeal giving them away, that we are letting our freedom be eroded from us. Obviously, with the health care bill, by a 220 to 215 vote, a very small majority in the House, hopefully there's hope in the Senate, of course, that enough conservative Democrats like the idea of freedom and like the idea of fiscal responsibility enough to avoid tripling our national debt, to avoid a $3 trillion addition to the national debt over the next 10 years, according to CBO estimates, and that they realize that the consumer, and we as Americans are the best entitled to make health care decisions for ourselves. It's sad, though, that it's actually come to this point where we have members of Congress who are so out of tune with the American way of life, with our individual responsibility, with our individual liberty, and the way that we as a country have been formed. It's sad that they have thought that this is the way that we as Americans should go forward as a nation, that the people of this country, they think that we want this, and we don't. people of America are individualists at heart. They understand value, they understand waste, and they understand fraud. Sadly, many Americans have been sold on this idea of universal health care being the root of all that is evil, that universal health care will solve all of the problems that the healthcare industry faces and has created for our country, when of course that's anything but true. We know, seeing the examples in Canada, seeing the examples in Britain, what universal health care means and the lower standards of care, the inaccessibility of care for people in regular society. And this is in a free society. This is not in a communist society. We have seen universal health care in free societies such as Canada and Western Europe. Care is diminished. Care is rationed. People, citizens who live in these countries and have access to this free health care come to the United States in order to receive adequate medical attention. Or at least they did. Maybe they won't after what the House of Representatives has given us on Saturday. Sadly, I don't know where we go from here, but there's now a universal health care option, and sadly, we know what this means. It means rationed care. It means higher taxes. It means a loss of innovation in the healthcare industry, that there is be no incentive for doctors to practice, no incentive for doctors to find efficiencies in cost in order to reduce the cost, because those costs will be passed to you, the taxpayer. Any good libertarian will tell you there's no such thing as a free lunch. The question now is, can we as Americans afford free health care? And can we as a society afford to see the continued diminution of our liberties? 20 years ago, the people of East Germany stood up and took their matters into their own hands to make sure that they had the liberty that we had in the West. I only wonder if we as Americans are able to stand up to keep the freedoms we have before they're gone forever.
Understand.